Hi everyone, welcome to Hive Talks with FlexiBees. I am Shreya Prakash, co-founder and CEO of FlexiBees. And Hive Talks is our endeavor to champion, to showcase, to platform amazing individuals and businesses who are doing a lot to empower women. And as you know, FlexiBees is a platform that helps women return to work after a career break through flexible opportunity, and it helps businesses hire from this amazing experienced pool to transform their trajectories. So here we are with somebody very special today, somebody whose work I have loved over the years. And she's done amazing stuff, and we talked to her today about all of it. Welcome, Mahima. This is by Mahima Vasisht. Welcome to Hive Talks. Mahima is a writer, a satirist, and the creator of Womaning in India, which is an award-winning newsletter read more than 500,000 times. There is a very strong purpose behind it, which we will talk about. Her trajectory is equally awe-inspiring. She is an engineer from NI Kurukshetra. She is an MBA from IIM Bangalore, which is how we know each other. And then she wasn't satisfied with that. I mean, most people would be, but she but she went on to do. She became an Indian civil servant after that, and amazing adventures through it all. Then she worked in a lot of spaces which worked towards changing the trajectory of social realities in India. She worked with Tata Trust, she worked with UNICEF, and today she is the award-winning creator of Womaning in India, which we will talk about more. Welcome, Mahima.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that really kind introduction, Share. Also, can I just say you have such a great screen presence? The way you talk to a camera, like you're actually talking to a human beings. I run a podcast myself and I always struggle with this part. So I want to compliment how amazing you are at it.
Oh, thank you. We are a remote organization. Most of our conversations happen across screens and we don't even notice it anymore. So I think that adds to it.
That must be it. I have a lot to learn.
Okay,
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
my pleasure. So let's get into it right away. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about womaning, and then we will dig into what were some of early influences which ultimately led to it?
Sure. So, Womaning in India began as a subtitle newsletter. I actually originally envisioned it as a book, and the reason I thought of it was that so I've always subscribed to feminist thought long before the word feminism became a thing and entered our common parlance. It just felt like there is some injustice happening in the world. I don't have the word for it, but there is some difference in the way the world treats men and women, and it seems unfair is what I always said even as a child. And the more I grew up, the more I read, the more vocabulary I got, learned about it, and the more it shaped my thinking around these issues. But what I found that often women would write opinion pieces, or feminists would write, but more by and large, mostly women and feminists, and they would be attacked by they be either saying this is one woman's opinion, she the femininity, all of those beautiful things that are thrown at any woman having an opinion. And so I found that merely expressing an opinion, however justified it might be, and however fact based it is not enough to change people's mindsets. So I wanted to do something with my writing which helped change those mindsets. And I realized that one way is to use hard data, which is undeniable. But I am not a physician, I'm not a data person. So for me, the other way that really appealed to me was stories. And I came across there's a Netflix documentary on Bill Gates, in which Bill and Melinda Gates talk about how they founded the BMGF Foundation. And Melinda said that, Bill is a guy who's moved by data, but she is the person who's moved by stories. And they took a vacation once to Africa where she met some women who had lost their children to malaria. And that's where she felt, and Bill was apparently already moved by the statistics of deaths and call of children by malaria, but still felt she was only moved when she met a mother who had lost a child. And I felt like most of us as human beings are more like Melinda, and so, just mere statistics also might not move us. So, the real stories of real people who are affected by a problem might be more moving for most people. And I think that proved to be right, because that gave me the idea of interviewing with and coming up with real stories of challenges they face which are purely gender based, which are not challenges that men will think about. That was the initial idea for Womaning. It began as a book idea, but I am not motivated enough to work without a deadline. And so it then turned into a Substack newsletter where I put myself on a weekly deadline, and that's the way it got started. And that seemed to have worked for me.
Amazing. And I think it's absolutely correct what you say about stories of others, moving people towards change, making them see things differently. Because I think a lot of us are often talking in an echo chamber, and we talk to others like us, and we think that our thoughts have found a home, and we are happy with that. But the true change will happen when people who don't think like us are motivated to see things differently, and that format that you had and the construct of using stories of real stories of people was I think very, very effective. So yeah, we'll talk more about that, but before that, tell us a little bit about your childhood. What could have been early influences which, like you said, made you aware of the injustice that exists?
Yeah, one of my earliest memories of a feminist stance I took was when my mother tried to teach me how to cook. And I remember she pulled me in the kitchen one day and said, "Come, I teach you how to do tadka or something." And my first response was, "Why are you not teaching my brother? Why are you only teaching me?" And and it so happened that I became so vehement on that point that my brother ended up learning cooking from her, but I didn't. Just out of protest, because why was he not asked first? I think growing up in a house which was otherwise like every day we were treated equally. Both my parents were very, like most middle class parents, very focused on the education of their children. They saw education as the gateway for progress for their next generation. So they were very keen on both of us studying, being good at school. We were never asked to do anything which was beyond school. Everything else was on hold, vacations, and we went on vacation. But like if 10th board exam is there, then no vacation, then no cable TV. So our whole family life was geared around our education. And so I grew up in otherwise a very gender equitable environment, I feel. But it was only towards my late teenage and college years when I started seeing that, wait, why am I suddenly now being treated differently? Not just at home, outside also. There's been questions asked about when are you coming, where are you going, who are you going with, which are legitimate questions that parents have around their daughter's safety. But it did feel jarring to me that my brother was not being asked those questions. So that was, I think, a very foundational experience for me growing up in a house with a brother, where I could see the different our trajectories took with time, and how we began at the same platform and went in the same direction, but at some point it started diverging our paths a little bit, and the way we were talked to, the way the questions that were asked to us by people, not just at home, beside everywhere. I think that is where the first idea, the seed of this gender equity being an issue took seed in my mind.
Yeah, I think for me, I was you were two sisters, so I didn't see this, but I think I always feel that growing up is a sort of, especially when we come from ungendered households, it's a process of unboxing the reality of the world, that the world is far from ungendered. And I think for me, that happened far later, which in itself is kind of, speaks to my privilege. Uh, but yeah, once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it, and that I think is also what led to FlexiBees. So good things happen when women see that the world is not just, and hopefully we ensure it reaches a place where it doesn't have to be that way. So your trajectory, all the various amazing things that you've done from engineering to MBA to Indian civil service, and then after that, your work experience, what new insights did it throw up around the same areas of gender inequity?
Yeah, so like you said, I've had a very successful academic career of engineering, MBA, UPSC, all of that. And the more successful I think you get as a woman, the fewer other women you see around you. And again, it's not because of any inherent merit. I would say even so-called merit is often rooted in privilege, which is something we only understand later. What kind of tuition classes you had access to, what kind of schools did you go to, did you learn to speak English early or later in life. All of these things affect your academic success. So I don't claim credit for most of that, but I did end up getting into rooms with fewer and fewer women. So with engineering itself, you start with a very skewed gender ratio, and then it gets worse when you move into management and then in civil services everywhere. And I think the difference in the way you are treated as a woman becomes more and more apparent if you have your eyes open to it. Like you said, if you have blinders on, you can pretty much go through life, especially with enough privilege. You can just skim through life without having really it affecting your day-to-day mental well-being. But once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it anymore. And I think I started seeing it early on, and then after once I could see it, I even saw it retrospectively. So during engineering, for example, I didn't feel, while I was there, I didn't feel gender differences. But once I started studying feminism more, and my thoughts got more articulated, I would see, yeah, we were put in a girls' hostel with a timing, and we were locked inside like cattle at 5 p.m. while boys were roaming around, accessing the library, the computer center. Those were the days when we didn't all have laptops in our hand. So all of this limited our access to education, to the spaces that should have been shared among all students. So stuff like that. No, then as you go on in MBA, there were men openly talking on our campus about how their dowry rates are increasing because they're getting an IM education. So stuff like that you see happening around you. You see the way hiring of a woman for a job is seen and painted in a certain compared to when a man gets a job, it's because of merit. When a girl gets a job, it's because of the length of her skirt. So these kind of conversations were very openly being had even in MBA, in so-called premier institutes of India. And then again in UPSC, it kind of brings you back to real India, because in UPSC, there is, it isn't that creme de la creme is not what UPSC selects. It is a successful exam in selecting a very fairly representative slice of India, I think. So you also come out of that IIT IM bubble, and suddenly you see, oh, sorry, real India thinks like this. Like I had batchmates coming up to me and saying, you are too educated, you will never find a husband. You have studied too much and you have got too many degrees, and now you are a UPSC civil servant. Nobody will marry you. So, so such stuff, more accomplishments, I think, puts women into a direct interaction with more such experiences. Uh, and I think women in every walk of life face it, but that's the kind that I faced. And that made me even more keenly aware with time of these differences and these challenges you can just surpass.
Yeah. And then when did womaning come into play? And this is my favorite question, and I thank my team for it. That when did you realize that writing was more than a form of expression and that it could create impact?
Yeah, I love this question. Very thoughtful. Whoever wrote this question, my thanks and cheers to them. I it made me really think when I saw this question in the pre-discussion sheet you shared. So I was thinking, actually, they began as there were two parallel trajectories. One was writing, where I just loved writing. I was good at it from school. I was in the college magazine editor, this and that. So that was just a creative channel for me, and it's something that I really enjoyed. And if we weren't living in a world where doctor, engineer were the only two options, maybe I would have become a writer. But it was never a lucrative option, never presented to a child who's academically sound as a career path. So I never saw it as a serious career option, but I did always have real love for it in my heart, reading and writing. And then in parallel, there was this trajectory going off, seeing the injustices and being this naive kid who still thought that the world would respond if you pointed them out. If only you said, hey, this is wrong, people would just correct it. Of course they would. Why wouldn't they? So I think those two trajectories kind of met somewhere maybe 10 years back, where I started realizing that, people do read. I used to write book reviews and movie reviews, and people would tell me, hey, because you said this, I saw this movie and I read that book, and I love your recommendations. I follow. I always read whatever you recommend. I always watch the movie you recommend. that made me feel like there is some influence to words also. And if if that influence can be combined with the causes that I am passionate about, then maybe I can even make a difference. So that's how I think those two worlds collided, of using writing as more than just a creative outlet, but actually a tool for change.
Yeah. We used to, I think, learn this the pen is mightier than the sword. I think in your case that came true, and in a very it's something that we got to enjoy the fruit of.
Yeah, no, the pen was also the only sword I had access to, and I still do. So there is, oh, everyone, I think we all contribute in our own way. If I were a movie maker, then that would be my sword. I'm a writer, so this is my sword. But yeah, I think it's a change that's happening slowly but surely, and everyone's playing their role. And I guess my role was this, so I'm playing this.
100%. Yes, well said, that we all contribute in our own ways. So, yeah. So, tell us a little bit more about when you started womaning. How did you go about it? What were some of the early experiences?
So, like I said, it was began as a book idea, and that stayed in my mind for I think 2-3 years. Where I just thought about it. I spoke to women, and I would note down some stories in my phone and the Evernote app or something. But it never really became like book chapters or chapter 1, chapter 2. It never took that form because later realized I was diagnosed with ADHD, and that's when I realized that I do not have that executive function to meet, work towards a goal without recurrent deadlines and rewards and motivations coming at every milestone. So I think I stumbled upon the idea of a Substack platform through a writing course that I did with Amit Verma. He's a major podcaster, writer, very celebrated figure for India's public policy space. And I had a one-on-one with him after that writing course, in which I asked him, I told him this is the idea I have for a book, but I'm not able to write as regularly as I would like to. So then he said, why don't you try Substack? And it was just a new format that had come in India at that time. And he said, making a weekly commitment to your audience will probably motivate you. And that worked like a charm, because and then, I convinced myself that the whole world is waiting. Then I was newsletter coming, and it worked very well for my whatever my brain chemistry is, because I would literally like at 11:59 put out a post because I didn't want it to become the next day. So it would that sort of was a great format that I found. And then through Substack, my initial posts, if you see, they are still finding their voice. But fairly soon I kind of figured out, I want to talk to my audience like I would talk to a friend. These are stories of real women. I want to tell them as much in their words as possible. I don't want to put my opinions on their stories. So a lot of it is quotations, direct quotations from women I have interviewed. Um, and so the format that I picked finally was that I will pick one issue for every week. And suppose the issue is how men interrupt women in meetings. And in office meetings, often women give ideas which are the credit for those ideas is given to another man who repeats the idea. And this is a thing that personally happened to me a lot. And for years, I used to blame myself and my own. Maybe I didn't phrase it right. Maybe I am not as liked by the boss as the guy is, or maybe my idea was not correct, but he gave it a better shape or something. And then it was years after blaming myself and trying to work on myself that I came across this article which said that this happens like as a systemic thing for women. And even in Obama's White House, the women of the White House banded together and said, if anyone interrupts Shreya, then when the mic comes to me, I will say, guys, can we circle back to what Shreya was talking about? And, bring the mic back to the other woman who was interrupted or talked over. And so that's when it clicked to me that, oh my God, this happens to me all the time. And I've been blaming myself as an individual, but it is not an individual thing at all. It's a gender thing.
Yeah.
So I started picking up small slivers of real life like this, because when people hear gender biases, they usually just jump straight to sexual harassment. But there is so many microaggressions that happen on a daily basis by well-meaning people who are not even realizing that they're doing it. I want to talk about those because I feel that in the bell curve, sexual harassment is somewhere here. And most people are in the larger middle where we are unknowingly, making people the victims of our biases and pushing these stereotypes on men and women, which might not be true of them individually. So that's the format I went with. I would pick one issue like this. I would write my own story for, and I would interview a few women, write their stories, and then finally conclude with some data of, maybe there's a Harvard study or a large scale academic review that has been done, which has found this to be a pattern across ages, across countries. And then maybe end with a sort of, my solution for this, what you can do as an individual, not what can be done by organizations and academia and everything. As an individual, next time you hear a woman being interrupted, you give the mic back to her. That's the small thing you can do today and tomorrow and at your workplace. That will help make the world slightly less nasty. And so that is the format I finally went with. And I used to pepper in a lot of Bollywood, Jane Pral references, because like I said, I want to talk to my readers like I talk to a friend. I'm a big Bollywood fan, even though Bollywood is not a big fan of women. But so I used to pepper in those GIFs and all DDLJ references and everything. So and also a lot of humor, because I felt like these are bitter pills and they just be easier to swallow with when pushed down with a bit of sugar. So that's the other part of that's my own flair that I brought into it, tried to bring in my own voice. And that also seems to have worked, because often feminist articles are difficult even for feminists to read. And I didn't want my reading my newsletter to become a chore for anybody. So I wanted it to be an enjoyable experience. And that also is another thing that I was very conscious of. I learned.
I mean, uh, Vanima, you're a master class with writing. I think mindset change, creating mindset change communication. It has so much. What you said, it there's so much material here for a case study where people, of course, and with I'm sure I will talk about that. Some of the impact that you had, some of the conversations that you sparked. Because this is something that everybody wants to do, from face wash brands who want to help people switch from soap to face wash, and I've worked in that industry, so I know mindset change is so tough, and the way that you explained it is so brilliantly, and by all of these things which seem very simple, but a lot of people don't understand because it's very rooted in how and in behaviors, in how people consume content, how mindset change really does happen. And I think your format was brilliant. I enjoyed reading it as a consumer, as somebody who's consuming that content, and I did analyze it much. But now that I hear you talk about it and all the series that Wet Yang did, I think it was brilliant. And everybody should go and read Womaning, because it teaches. I think it can teach you how to influence, how to win friends and influence people. I don't know if you won a lot of friends. He did as they did it. So that's it.
I definitely did. I think you and I also got back in touch when I started reading. So many people, new friends and old friends, reading old friends alike happened a lot too.
Tell us a little bit about the influence, the conversations, some of the change that you've seen happen. People have told you.
Oh yeah, there's some like really heartwarming stuff, and I tried really hard to preserve all of it, but it's not possible even, because it used to be just so many emails, messages, voice notes, video that used to come, that I've not done a good job of preserving all of them, and I really beat myself up over that. But some of the stories that come to mind are men, women, even children. It's beautiful stuff. So a woman wrote to me about how she mended a relationship with her mother, which was going very fraught and they were getting distance, because she said that she saw her mother's struggles in new light after reading one of the pieces I wrote. A man wrote to me and was regularly used to write to me that he had got divorced, and he said that his family is broken because, and now that he's reading stuff about how men behave in marriages, weaponized incompetence, not doing work and then blaming it on the woman for having higher standards, or Raja Beta syndrome, where your parents are never expected you to do housework, and when your wife suddenly expects you, then it feels like an unfair burden being put on you, and your own parents will try to shield you from the burden of just literally raising your own family and managing your own household. He said when he read these pieces, which I wrote about marriages, that it made him see his role in his marriage in new light, and how for years his wife tried to, work on the relationship and how his attitude towards it is the reason that finally led to their divorce, and how he was now trying to raise his two boys in a better way than that. He's very, very touching. Every time he writes to me, I would say it's really heartwarming to read that impact. Then one of my readers said that his teenage daughter, I used to write every Friday. So she said that Friday she sits on your page and she continuously is refreshing the page. And has Maima auntie written yet? Has she written yet? And then when you publish, she takes a printout of it, and on Saturday she on breakfast she brings it to our breakfast table and she says, "Mama, Papa, you both read this, and this happens in our house also, and what are we going to do about it?" So it was just so beautiful. I sent her like a book and everything. I was so touched by that. And I was like, I'm not writing for a 12, 13-year-old audience here. So I was not expecting a child to be reading my work, but let alone to be such a force of change in her home. So just also the fact that I was able to reach the youth, the future, women of the future, men of the future was really, really beautiful.
Yeah, it's amazing because, like you said, that leap that you yourself made from internalizing some of the stuff that was happening and blaming your own self for it, and to the fact that it's a systemic problem that affects all of us. That leap is very important. If we don't acknowledge it and understand, how will we either, work around it or find ways to change it?
Exactly. No, I always say, my audience is both men and women, but for different reasons. For women, I want them to read this stuff and realize that there has to be stuff that you're blaming yourself for, which is gendered, which is not your fault. It's purely because of your gender. And I want you to read that and feel that burden lift off your heart that you've been carrying around, the burden of blame, of guilt, of shame that is pushed on women, and that made to feel like they are individually responsible for so many of the challenges which they are not. They're systemic challenges. And for men, I know that men are often portrayed as the enemy, but they're not. Patriarchy is the enemy, misogyny is the enemy. And many men are also, because they are conditioned in living in that world, they are blind to those challenges, especially when you have privilege, any kind of privilege. You don't see the world from the eyes of a person who doesn't have that privilege. It's very hard to do that. So, but I also know there are many well-meaning men out there who want to be good allies, but they just are not aware of what it is like to live as a woman. And so that is my other audience that I write for, is those men. So many men write to me. I think I get more heartwarming emails from men than women even, who write, thank you for this education. I've learned so much about. Now I understand what my sister was going through, what my wife was going through, what my mother keeps talking about. So it makes them also in better allies. At least the men who are willing to learn and engage with this stuff are my favorite audience, because I feel like they can be the biggest agents of change.
Yes. And not to put any pressure on you, but I can see a book, Men Write to Me. It's like men explain things to me, but a much more positive version of that. Men it replies to me, and it's amazing because I think men need to see these role models. I mean, men also need allies, as they need to see that there are allies, that that's very important as well. So yeah, the book is still, something that we can perhaps expect in the next few years, hopefully. So, tell us, was there any backlash? Were there any sort of negative experiences? You're a woman writing about women. How was that?
So the backlash, I totally expected backlash from men. And it has really taken me by surprise that either men engage positively and are actually genuinely trying to learn, who write these beautiful, heartwarming emails to me. Or there are men who are happy in their privilege and there is no reason for them to engage with content like mine. Especially because it's long form content. I'm not making a 30-second reel that you can quickly watch and bash me for my haircut or my whatever, my dress I'm wearing, and etc. So it's hard to engage with a 3,000 word essay, right? It takes effort. And if you're living happy in your privilege, and his mother is giving you bed tea and your wife is ironing your clothes, really there's no reason to go and engage with content that makes you uncomfortable. So I have not faced that much backlash from men for those reasons, but I have faced a bit from women, which is interesting because I think for many women it's a coping mechanism to to pretend that there is no misogyny or there is no patriarchy, especially if you are living a life that is really deeply impacted by patriarchy. Suppose you weren't educated enough, or you don't have a job, or don't have the ability to have a job, don't have financial independence, don't have physical independence to go where you want, wear what you want, live your life the way you want, and you're living under an oppressive force. It's easier to pretend that that force doesn't exist and this was my choice. And I feel that if somebody tries to pop that bubble, you react quite negatively to that. So that's the reason why I face backlash from women, which I find that, they don't want that bubble to be popped, because if it's popped, then their whole reality cracks. And so I respect that, and I'm like, you don't have to read this. I understand why it's making you uncomfortable, and I can't help you. Maybe nobody can help you. Maybe you can help yourself, but you don't have the right circumstances, or you don't have the ability to make choice. Maybe this generation it's not going to get solved. Maybe in the next generation. But in any situation, I understand that you don't want to engage with this content. Stay away. It's okay. Let's you have your mental health, and don't engage with content that disturbs it. That's the least I can offer. So yeah, I get backlash from women like that, but that's like intermittent. It's not very organized or large scale.
Understood. And again, on the topic of men and how you see womaning helping men, tell us now what shape womaning has taken. You started something new, and what they meant it?
Yeah, so I think one of the problems that started happening with womaning was because I was listening to so many women and their stories, and there was so much pain and drama in those stories that I feel like I was also going through a difficult phase in my own life, and all of it kind of piled on, and it started affecting my mental health also. So I did take like a year-long break from womaning last year. And so this year I've kind of come back with something that I find might be more sustainable and more positive for me to do. And it's also something that's more on my being. And every writing piece of advice out there is write what you know, and write what moves you. So right now I've switched gears to something which is in the adjacent lane, which moves me more, which is my role as a mother. In I have a 6-year-old boy, and I think the biggest impact I can leave is raise a boy differently from the way men have traditionally been raised. You are also a boy mom. We've had many conversations around this, about how, the way girls have been raised, I think, well, for many generations already. Like you and I, we were raised, and our parents told us, there is no limit to your dreams. You can become prime minister. You can become Indra Nui. These were the role models you were growing up, right? Like there was an Indira Gandhi, there was an Indira Nui. These are your choices. Sky is the limit. You can do whatever you want. But the men were never told that your wife might become an Indira Gandhi or an Indira Nui, and you might have to stay back at home and raise the child, and you might have to do the dishes once in a while. You might have to do the laundry. No boy was taught that, and so there is this vast dissonance in the way the couples of today have been raised. The women have been raised to think that they can do anything outside the house, but the men have been raised to think they should do nothing inside the house. And that's not the way any life can sustain. So I think the way that boys are being raised has to be changed drastically. So that's what my new venture is about. So within Womaning, what I've started is a new section. Substack allows you to make separate sections, thankfully. So it's a section called Mama in Progress, because my kid calls me mama, and I think being a mother is a constant learning. It's such a steep learning curve. It's after all of the UPS and the IIMs of my life, I think it's this is the steepest learning curve I've ever faced. It's the hardest job in the world. I refuse to believe that any prime minister or president's job is harder than any mother's job. There are no weekends, there are no breaks, you are never off duty. Even when you and I are on calls right now, half our mind is on what our kids are doing. And so this is the hardest job in the world, and I think this is the place where we can make the most impact on the women of tomorrow, is with how we raise our bills today. So that's what I write about now. I write more about the way we talk to our children, about feelings, emotions, how to break cycles of intergenerational trauma. I've started a book club for my son and his friends, and we read books which are talking about, how to be more in touch with your emotions. Because I think especially men not being in touch with their emotions is a very, very foundational problem, which leads to a woman in India being needed later in life. So boys who are taught never to cry and to bury their feelings and any uncomfortable emotion shrug it off, those boys grow up to become men who then want to put a woman under their thumb. So yeah, these are the issues I write about now.
For themselves also. I mean, I see it in small little ways. I see it with my husband. I mean, who doesn't have as much of a support system as human beings should have. I shouldn't be the only person that he's able to talk to about his feelings and emotions. But men don't have that somehow that ecosystem where they could talk about things that are affecting them, and yeah. And I really resonate with what you're saying, with what we're doing right now, Mama in Progress, every word of it, because it is a work in progress. I second guess myself every second, as to whether I'm doing the right thing. And my kid is 7 now, and it's such a I mean, I feel the weight of my actions very deeply, because I know he gets influenced by everything around him. We say how we achieve things, and he's also entering that phase where he's seeing certain social realities. And I wrote a post about it a couple of days back, where he's seeing that women, for example, are not going to work as much as say men are going, and it's something that he is curious about. And my job here is to not dismiss his observation, because it is something that happens, but to create context around it, uh, to create that standing that all women work irrespective of whether they go to an office or not. And that job is a very important job. It's very tough. It has to be respected. So yeah, there is some. Suddenly, I'm having very deep conversations with my kid. I never thought at 7. I thought my life would be simpler.
Well, totally. They're like teenagers is the word that
They yeah, they are totally. I mean, I think they are so smart compared to how we were possibly at this age, because they have so much more exposure. And I think also because we talk to them, especially parents like us, we talk to them so much. I think it pulls them up. It's a form of mentorship in a way that, sort of makes them more aware of what's happening, gives them the tool, the schools they go to. My kid is learning emotional regulation in school. Can you believe that? I mean, at 40, I'm like, okay, I'm not sure I'm able to regulate my emotions. Like, he's learning emotional regulation, and when I get angry or upset, now I have the tools also to tell him that, okay, listen, I didn't regulate my emotions well. I'm sorry of that. So it's a reverse mentoring as well.
absolutely, all the books I read in the kiddie book club, and it's like a really small, 100-page book. Oh, sorry, 100-word book, and it's such a tiny thing. It's got a lot of big pictures and all, and I am learning from it. I read this book with him called the Worrysaurus, which is about a dinosaur who's always worried, and I was like, I am Worrysaurus. But so there, I learn more from those kiddie books than the kids do. I am sure of it. And I always pick these books which I feel like I missed this in my education. Emotional regulation is such a foundational thing we should have been taught, no? And here we are going wild with all of the violence in society. Is why? Because we were not taught to regulate our emotions. We were not taught to deal with anger, sadness, grief in healthy manners. We are taught that there's a shame associated with bad emotions, push them under the rug and don't deal with them and pretend they don't exist. They don't go away anyway. They come back to you and they'll come back in worse forms if you don't deal with them. Such a foundational thing, and I'm so happy that the generation of current generation is being taught these things. Boys, girls, everybody, but especially boys. I feel like this is such an important tool. Like you said, men not having support system. It's in an extreme case, this is why men suicide rates are there than women. So men are as much victims of patriarchy as women are. So we just feel like, men are the enemy, men are winning, and it's working well for men. But even men are suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In a world where men are forced to be providers, when perhaps not everybody wants to be, or they want to do something which is different, experimental, but they don't have the sanction to do that, or maybe even the financial independence, given that women are taught to, not go out and build their careers the same way.
Yeah, no, this is something that I also saw a lot in the government, where there's a certain retirement age, and I found that women after that retirement would go home and redefine themselves. Somebody would start an NGO, somebody would start cooking, and somebody would start a YouTube channel, and somebody would spend time with their grandkids and find some meaning in their life. And men, the minute they are stripped away of that designation and that office, and the peon who carries the lunchbox to office, they fall apart because they've been taught to not define themselves as anything other than their job title. So it's and so men would die early after retirement. Their health would suffer more after retirement. They would be clinging to, oh, can I do this role in this place? And then they would feel offended that I'm not being given as much respect as I was when I was secretary or I was joint secretary. So it happens very clearly in the government, and I'm sure in the private sector also, where as soon as retirement happens, men don't know what to do with their lives anymore because they were never taught to define their lives as more than their jobs. So a lot of ways in which men suffer, and we don't want our sons to suffer, and we don't want them to inflict suffering on the world, on anyone else.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is why Mama in Progress is my next venture and passion project.
Exactly. Try and link some of these to our when we post it, and hopefully more people can go. And I'm sure you have no dearth of readers, but hopefully more people can discover you. Yes.
Always happy to have more.
What role does vulnerability play in your storytelling, and does it intimidate you or empower you?
Oh, vulnerability is like the bedrock of my storytelling, I think, because I begin every piece with my own personal story of when I have faced this challenge. And often I've written about some really difficult stories to tell also. I wrote a piece on obstetric violence,
Yeah.
and how doctors, obstetricians and gynecologists inflict some sort of mental, emotional, or even physical violence on women during childbirth or during their caregiving. And I was also in a way affected by this when my kid was born. My obstetrician was very cruel, very mean, and was literally screamed at me while I was lying open on her table. So it was a really traumatic story. For many years, I kept it inside. For the first 1 or 2 years, I think I even blamed myself for something I might have done wrong. But then later I realized a person is helpless on your lying open with her intestines in your hand is not the time to be guilty and shaming her. So, and the more I read about it, the more I realized that again, it's systemic. It wasn't individual at all. So very difficult story to tell. Then I wrote another story about being sexually harassed once in a public place, and how I tried to report that, and also how the justice system let me down. I've kind of like, I think a part of me likes to play with the edges of my comfort zone, and this is making you feel difficult. This is a difficult story to tell. We'll tell this. Now this is exactly what we'll tell next time. So I think the more vulnerable we are, the more we find our shared humanity, because those pieces have the kind of response I got from my readers was so touching, and it makes us feel less alone when we hear somebody else's story of vulnerability. So I almost feel like it's a responsibility for me to tell a vulnerable story. So I speak very openly about things that are taboo. I'll talk about being depressed, I'll talk about being anxious, I'll talk about having ADHD, I'll talk about all the challenges that are we are supposed to shove under the carpet again and pretend they don't exist, or put on a mask of being very highly functional, successful women of tomorrow and career women, and whatever we are supposed to, whatever other masks we are supposed to carry, we are struggling. All of us are struggling. I think before we started this recording, we were asking each other, how are you? And the answers were, we are surviving.
Yeah.
We are hanging there by thin thread. So let's not pretend that we are these super highly functional women who are acing everything at work and at home.
Yeah.
No, all of us are struggling, and it makes people who are struggling silently feel less alone when a person with a certain degree of influence talks about their struggles. So I think talking about my own vulnerability is something I just masochistically do a lot of, and I feel like it's almost like a responsibility I carry as a voice of some influence.
And that's beautiful, the responsibility aspect of it. Yeah, that's a great way to see to see it. And give us your advice to women who perhaps want to speak up or want to write, but they fear judgment or failure. What would you say to them?
Oh, this is classic imposter syndrome where we are all convinced that we are the only imposter and everybody else is functional, which is why I say that we have to talk about our struggles more, because we like to pretend that success stories are things that happen overnight and magically. No, nobody is an overnight success, nobody is a magical success. Everyone has had some struggle, and everyone has a struggle that you are not aware of. So you are not the only person with a struggle is my first advice. And secondly, the world will not fall apart if you write a bad piece. The world was never waiting for me to put out my piece by Friday midnight. It's a thing that I imagined and put on myself to make myself meet a deadline. But you have to remind yourself that frankly you are not that important. So don't convince yourself that the world will fall apart if I write a piece with a typo in it, or I don't write the perfect piece. And imposter syndrome is something all creators go through. Sorry, one second, I'll just drink water. Edit this part out, please.
Hey,
Hey, you should drink water from this on the call.
I just realized.
Okay, now we will not edit this part out.
I
Yay.
love it.
Women and hydration, womaning hydrating women. So I was saying, imposter syndrome is something every creator goes through, but scientifically it's been proven that women go through imposter syndrome a lot more, because we are taught that oh, you have to be humble as a woman and you have to be modest, and it's not good color on a woman to be bragging about herself too much. So in that striving for humility, I think we overcorrected, and now women are not confident of themselves. Again, there have been studies that have shown that a woman who meets 7 out of 10 criteria in a job ad will not apply for that job. A man who meets 2 will apply for it.
Yeah.
And so guess who will get the job? If more men are applying, more men will get the job. So imposter syndrome is something every creator goes through, women more than men.
Yeah.
So you just have to put yourself in that uncomfortable space where it will hurt, but you just close your eyes and hit publish and just hope for the best, because I think doing a larger volume of work is how you also find your voice and how you also get better at your art. So that's what happened with me and womaning, right? For 2 years it was sitting in my notes app and not going anywhere, and therefore the volume of work was abysmal. I did maybe 2 posts worth of work in 3 years, and then I wrote 100 posts in 3 years. So when you put your work out is when you also start doing more work and you start getting better at it. So please just don't wait. Start publishing.
Amazing. And I forgot what I was. Haven't you written a piece about imposter syndrome also?
I have, yes. So it was incidentally 2 women who discovered that imposter syndrome even exists, and not surprising. And so there's a whole study and body of work around imposter syndrome and why women go through it more than men. So it's good to be conscious of that, because it helps you know what you're fighting against. And again, that it's not individual, it is systemic. So you have to stop blaming yourself or whatever burden you're putting on yourself. Let go of it. It's not just you, everyone is going through it.
In fact, we see it in our work also. So it's something that we started noticing that when women that we are placing in jobs, and when they go into interviews, even if the question is so tell us about yourself or what you've done, they start with a career break. And nothing wrong with that, but it's I mean, in fact, we encourage them to own the break. But they think, or they used to, maybe things have also changed in the last few years. Women used to think of it as they were on the defense, basically. They were on the back foot because of the career break. And it was very telling that when you're being asked to talk about the things that you bring to the table, and the positive impact of your experiences and what that could potentially be for that organization that you're talking to, you choose to first start from the fact that the almost apologetic stance of I've had a career break, but this is what I can do. So that is something that we actually started coaching our women to be mindful of. And to build that confidence, because confidence is the first thing that takes a hit when you actually are out of the workforce for a lot of women. And we started trying to very actively tell them that be confident, own your break, talk about the skills that you do have, that's why this interview is happening. I mean, everybody knows in the work that we do, everybody knows, the client knows, that business knows that they're talking to a woman who's coming after a break. That is not news to them. So yeah, it's and we also have this, we are asked sometimes, why not men also, why only women? And there are, of course, many reasons for that, but one very important reason is that, um is that if we open it up to men and women, the kind of aggression with which men come, and they, and the kind of way in which they project themselves, very different from the energy that women bring. And even if that man is, say, coming from a break, which today is not the case, very few men have that background, it's still different, and we somewhere we have that sense of wanting to protect the women, and give them that space where they can be themselves, and yet get that job which they're going to be very, very good at. So yeah, but I think some of these things are changing, because as more and more Gen Zs are coming into the workforce, I think they bring with them a confidence that perhaps the previous generations didn't have. So yeah, and I think the way that I see young girls today being raised, I think I'm pretty hopeful that the women of the next generation are going to be every bit as confident as they should be.
Yeah, I completely concur with all of that, because I also feel like sometimes I have to tell myself, would a man do this in my position? If would I over apologize? I also have a lot of self doubt. I will put 100 smileys in a text message to not appear threatening and aggressive when I'm asking for something. All of these things I always keep checking myself, and toning it down a bit, because it's not about living your life as a man would live, but there are things that we can learn from men also.
Yeah.
And like you said, if a man had taken a career break, he would make it a minor footnote in his interview. He would not even probably not even mention it, because like you said, the employer has seen your CV, they already know it, but the woman leads with it. So there is a big gap in the two way the
Yeah.
two genders behave in
Yeah.
job interviews, in life, in creator work, all of it.
Yeah.
And there is sometimes it's useful to remind ourselves of what would the other gender do, and
Yeah.
sort of try to bridge that gap a little bit.
What would men do? Yeah.
I often do that, Mahima, if you were a man, would you be doing this? Would you, would it be this hard for you to say no to this thing? Probably not. You would say no and not think twice about it. And here you are staying up on nights for a week because you have to say one uncomfortable no to one person. It's
Good
hilarious.
little handy tip.
Yeah.
One writer artist whose work you think everybody should read.
My favorite right now, I'm a murderhead, and my favorite is Thursday Murder Club series by Richard Osman. And it's not just about murder; it's about aging, about lies, about experiences, about families, and the murder is a subtext in it. So it's not even I don't even remember the mysteries of each book, but I do remember the character. They're very beautiful. The heartwarming books. They make you tear up and make you laugh. Highly, highly recommended.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, I love this books as well. I mean, it really brings out that perspective on aging that I think is missing in a lot of popular culture today.
Exactly.
One social conditioning you would like to unlearn or have had to unlearn.
Saying no. Very hard for me to say no to things I don't want to do, and I just say yes to everything, and I overburden myself, and I end up spending time on things that I don't want to do, and I end up having less energy and time for things that I do want to do. So I'm very actively trying to learn to be better at saying no. And it is objectively harder for women. People don't like to hear no from women. People are much happier accepting a no from a man. But you have to learn to preserve your own sanity.
Yeah. Beautiful. Uh, a thing you do to stay grounded when writing gets overwhelming.
I play with my kid. It's amazing. It's the best form of therapy. And not just writing gets overwhelming, life gets overwhelming, work gets overwhelming, all of it. I think I just try to I shut everything down and I'll sit and do a jigsaw puzzle with my kid or something. And that's just like the best therapy.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's so great. I think I don't have that same, I think, experience, because the I don't know, for whatever reason. It also depends on who I am, who my kid is. Yeah, but I'm very happy that you have that. That's amazing, and it's a super sound endorsement of being a parent.
Yeah. Recommend it if you want it, then because it's a big commitment. But yeah, I'm saying being a parent is a big commitment, and I totally respect people who don't, who choose not to do it. And I really respect that choice because many people bring children into this world without actually having wanted them, and that's the biggest injustice you can do to yourself and another life. But for those who do on and are considering it, I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful experience, and it is a very big responsibility, and at the same time, it brings you joy and love that you never experienced before.
A creative risk you took that scared you.
Starting Omani, then more recently starting Mama in Progress. I think for like months I was talking to women readers who I know and who I recently met, and I would be like, "Hey, you're not a parent. Would you read it?" Is I wrote a parenting thing, and then many of them were very kind and supportive, and they were like, "Listen, we are interested in your voice and what you write, and you can write whatever you want, and we'll still read it." So that's the overwhelming response I got from most readers, if not all. And but it was really scary to make that pivot because I'm still a little scared about it, about people not want expecting, they're like, we're here to read about those gender stereotypes and biases. Why are you telling us about children books? But it is related if you really think about it. But yeah, it is a creative risk that I took very recently, and it still scares me. But it's like I said, write what you know and write what you say.
I mean, I'm really enjoying reading that. So yeah, of course, I resonate completely, 100%, whatever you're saying. And finally, if you could wave a magic wand, what would be that one thing about society that would change?
I think children being loved, I think is such a basic thing, and it doesn't happen, and it's heartbreaking that it doesn't happen in every home. That the child is truly loved and valued and cared for and given the all of their emotional needs especially are met. It does not happen, and so many children grow up around warm pay, their feelings being neglected, and feel like that lays the foundation for all of the other hobbies that society has. I truly feel like if every child was loved, then there would be no war, there would be no climate change. There would be no misogyny, there would be no patriarchy, there would be no casteism. I feel like all of the problems of society, literally, no stretch, would be solved if every child was just loved.
Okay, I love it. I love it. I mean, I think I realized very early on for me, at least till the time I became a parent, I didn't know the kind of parent that I would be. But as soon as my kid was born, I knew that uh, nothing matters. I mean, discipline and this and that, none of it matters. The job of a parent is to love their child.
Exactly. Yes, yes. What school, what nutritions, what gluten-free bread, all of that stuff which our generation is obsessed with. Oh, best school mein bhejna hai and ICSE or CBSE. All of it doesn't. The biggest thing is love your child, and it's such a basic thing which even the most privileged parents often miss. So that's one thing I would. If I could have a magic wand and change it, I find if I did within 50 years, you'll see 30 years. Problem of the world solved.
Amazing. Another very, very profound and nifty hack.
Hack. Hack.
If only are reaching an impact will change the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so here we are at the end of our wonderful conversation, Mahima. As always, wonderful talking to you. I think everything that you say, I completely relate to, and yet the way that you put it and articulate it, it adds a layer of understanding to what my experiences have been, and for that, I always love talking to you, and reading what you write. Thank you so much for coming on Hive Talks. Um, Looking forward to many such conversations. Looking forward to reading more of Mama at Work. Mama at Work, right?
In progress.
In pro. Mama in progress. Yes.
You are always thinking about mama's at work, let's say. Thank you for having me, Shreya, and thank you to your entire team for putting together these thoughtful conversations, these thoughtful questions. Always a pleasure talking to you, and my best wishes to Hype Talks and to the Plexi Beasties.
Thank you so much.